Jesus taught his disciples how to pray. Everyone knows that. But what almost no one knows is that the Our Father wasn't the only form of prayer he taught. In fact, there was a much deeper, more intimate, and more powerful way to connect with God. A way that Jesus practiced alone in the wee hours of the morning, far from his disciples, far from the crowds. A way that Padre Pio discovered and practiced for more than 50 years. Today, I'm going to reveal that way to you. Not because I invented it, not because I read it in some self-help book, but because Padre Pio left records of it, because he taught it to his closest spiritual children, and because the fruits of this prayer are visible in the lives of all who practice it. Before we continue, I need to give you a warning. What I'm about to teach you does not replace the traditional prayers of the Church. The Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Rosary, all of that remains valid and powerful. What I'm going to teach you is something additional, a deeper layer of prayer that few know about, a way of praying that Jesus reserved for the most important moments. Padre Pio had an expression he used frequently. He said, "There are prayers that only reach the ceiling, and there are prayers that pierce the heavens." The difference between the two isn't in the words. It's in the heart. It's in the way you place yourself before God. To understand this way Jesus prayed, we need to go back to the Gospels, not to the most well-known texts, but to the details that often go unnoticed. Mark, chapter 1, verse 35 says, "Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a secluded place where he prayed." This verse seems simple, but it hides a profound revelation. Jesus didn't go to pray after breakfast. He didn't go to pray when he had some spare time. He got up in the wee hours of the morning, when it was still dark. This means that prayer wasn't just an addition to his day. It was the foundation. It was the first thing. It was the bedrock upon which everything else was built. Padre Pio did exactly the same thing. He would wake up at 3 in the morning every day, not because someone forced him to, not because it was a rule of the monastery, but because he had discovered what Jesus knew, that the hours before dawn are different from all the others. He explained it like this: during the day, the world is awake. There are millions of thoughts, millions of words, millions of desires crossing the air. It's like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a screaming crowd. But in the wee hours of the morning, when the world sleeps, the silence opens up, and in that silence, God's voice becomes clear. But it wasn't just the time that mattered. It was also the place. The Gospel says that Jesus went to a secluded place. He didn't go to the temple. He didn't go to the synagogue. He went to a place where there was no one, a place of absolute solitude. Padre Pio had his own secluded place within the monastery. It was a small room in the attic with no windows, no furniture, just a crucifix on the wall and a pillow on the floor to kneel on. He called this place My Hermitage, and that's where he met Jesus every morning. There's a story that illustrates the importance of this place. In 1945, the San Giovanni Rotondo monastery needed renovations. For a few weeks, Padre Pio didn't have access to his prayer room in the attic. He was forced to pray in the common chapel, along with the other friars. In those weeks, Padre Pio was visibly disturbed. He couldn't reach the same depth of prayer. He didn't have the same experiences. He confided in a fellow friar, "It's as if God has moved. I know he is everywhere, but in that room, I found him in a special way. Now I need to look for him elsewhere." When the renovations were finished and he returned to his room in the attic, the first thing he did was spend an entire night there, making up for lost time. The next day he said, "I found him again. He was waiting for me." This story teaches us that the place matters. not because God is limited to a space, but because we are creatures of habit. When we associate a specific place with prayer, our heart prepares automatically when we enter there. The place becomes a door, a portal between the visible and the invisible world. Now comes the most important part. What did Jesus do in this secluded place, in the wee hours of the morning, alone? The Gospel doesn't give details, but Padre Pio, who had frequent visions of Jesus, received this revelation directly. He recounted that in one of these visions, Jesus appeared to him and said, "Pio, do you want to know how I prayed to the Father? Then listen. True prayer doesn't begin with words. It begins with silence. It's not you talking to God. It's you emptying yourself so that God can speak to you." This phrase completely changed the way Padre Pio understood prayer. He realized that most people, when they pray, do a monologue. They talk, ask, and then say Amen and leave. But Jesus did it differently. Jesus emptied himself first. He created an inner space of absolute silence, and only then, in that space, did communication with the Father happen. Padre Pio developed a method based on this revelation, a 5-step method that he called the Way of Jesus. I'm going to teach you each step in detail. The first step is the emptying. Before you start to pray, you need to empty your mind of all thoughts, all worries, all plans, all fears, all hopes, everything. Padre Pio said that this is the most difficult step because we are used to having a full mind all the time. We think that if we aren't thinking about something, we're wasting time, but in prayer, emptiness is the goal. How to do this? Padre Pio taught a simple technique. Sit in silence, close your eyes, and start to observe your thoughts. Don't try to stop them, just observe. See each thought arise and see each thought pass, like clouds in the sky. You are not the clouds, you are the sky. The thoughts come and go, but you remain. In the beginning, this exercise may only last a few seconds before you get lost in some thought, but with practice, the time increases. Padre Pio was able to remain in this state of emptiness for hours, and it was in this emptiness that he found God. There is a complementary technique that Padre Pio taught to help with the emptying. He called it breath of heaven. It works like this. Inhale slowly, counting to 4. Hold the air, counting to 4. Exhale slowly, counting to 4. Wait, counting to 4. Repeat this cycle 7 times. With each breath, imagine that you are expelling a thought. Worry, go away. Fear, go away. Plan, go away. Anxiety, go away. Until only the emptiness remains. The second step is the presence. After emptying the mind, you need to become aware of the presence of God, not imagine God, not visualize Jesus, but realizing that God is already there, has always been there, and that the only obstacle was your mind, too full to notice him. Padre Pio described this moment like this. It's like when you're in a dark room, and suddenly, someone turns on a light. The light was always available. The switch was always on the wall. But you were so accustomed to the darkness that you forgot to turn it on. Emptying is the moment. You find the switch. The presence is the moment. The light comes on. For many people, this is the most transformative moment of prayer, because it's not something you do. It's something you allow to happen. You don't create God's presence. You simply remove the obstacles that were preventing you from perceiving it. Padre Pio said that God's presence has signs. You might feel a peace that doesn't come from external circumstances. You might feel a warmth in your chest. You might feel tears welling up for no apparent reason. You might feel a profound joy that has no logical explanation. These are signs that you've crossed the veil, that you've left the visible world and entered the invisible. The third step is listening. This is the step that differentiates the way of Jesus from all others. In most prayers, we speak and hope that God listens. In the way of Jesus, we become silent and wait for God to speak. Padre Pio was categorical about this. He said 90% of prayer should be silence. We talk too much, we ask too much, we complain too much, and then we wonder why God doesn't answer. But how will He answer if we never stop talking to listen? Listening doesn't necessarily mean hearing an audible voice. Although Padre Pio sometimes did, it means being open to any form of communication that God chooses to use. It could be an impression in your heart. It could be an image in your mind. It could be a certainty that arises from nowhere. It could be a peace that dissolves anxiety. It could be a direction that clears up a confusion. The important thing is to be available. Padre Pio said that many Christians treat God like an employee. They hand over their list of requests and leave without waiting for an answer. But God isn't an employee. God is our Father, and fathers want to talk to their children, not just receive shopping lists. There are 3 types of answers that God usually gives in silent prayer, according to Padre Pio. The first is the word, a phrase that arises in the heart with unusual clarity. You know that you didn't think of it. It came from somewhere else. The second is the image, a scene that appears in the mind, usually symbolic, that answers a question that you had. The third is the feeling, a peace, a joy, a certainty that answers yes or no to something that you were discerning. The fourth step is surrender. After emptying, perceiving the presence, and listening comes the moment to surrender. But not to surrender requests. Surrender yourself, surrender your will, surrender your plans, surrender your future. Jesus did this in Gethsemane in a dramatic way. He said, "Our Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." This is the perfect model of surrender. Jesus had a human desire not to suffer, but He surrendered that desire to our Father. He said, in essence, my will says one thing, but your will is more important. Padre Pio practiced this surrender every day. He said every morning, "I place my life in God's hands like a blank sheet of paper, and I say, write what you want, make of me what you want, use me as you want. I have no plans of my own. I have only availability for your plans." This is liberating and terrifying at the same time. Liberating because you no longer have to carry the weight of controlling everything. Terrifying because you lose control. But Padre Pio guaranteed, whoever surrenders their life to God never regrets it. Whoever tries to control their own life always regrets it. Surrender has a clear sign, according to Padre Pio. When you truly surrender, anxiety disappears. If you are still anxious about the outcome, you haven't surrendered yet. When the surrender is true, a peace comes, a peace that says, no matter what happens, I am in God's hands. The fifth and final step is gratitude, and this is where the way of Jesus differs most radically from common prayers. Most people give thanks after receiving. Jesus gave thanks before receiving. In the Gospel of John, chapter 11, when Jesus is going to resurrect Lazarus, He says, "Our Father, I thank you because you have heard me." Lazarus was still dead. The miracle hadn't happened yet, but Jesus was already giving thanks. Why? Because He had absolute certainty that our Father would hear. Padre Pio incorporated this principle into his prayer. He taught, after surrendering your will to God, give thanks. Don't give thanks for anything specific. Give thanks for the certainty that God has already heard. Give thanks for the certainty that God is already acting. Give thanks for the certainty that whatever the outcome, it will be the best possible outcome. This anticipatory gratitude is a powerful act of faith. It's saying to God, I trust in you so much that I don't need to wait to see the result. I am already grateful because I know that you are good and that everything that comes from you is good. These are the 5 steps of the way of Jesus: emptying, presence, listening, surrender, and gratitude. Padre Pio practiced them every early morning and for over 50 years, and the fruits were extraordinary. But let me tell you how this prayer worked in practice through some stories that Padre Pio told. The first story is about a critical moment in Padre Pio's own life. It was 1918, shortly after he received the stigmata. The church was investigating whether the wounds were authentic or a fraud. There was a group of ecclesiastics who wanted to condemn him as an impostor. If that happened, Padre Pio would be expelled from the church, publicly humiliated. His life would be destroyed. The night before the final decision, Padre Pio couldn't sleep. The anxiety was enormous. He knew he was innocent, but he also knew that the truth doesn't always prevail in human decisions. What did he do? He practiced the way of Jesus. First, he emptied his mind. He let go of all the fear of condemnation, all the anger at his accusers, all the hope of being acquitted. Everything. He was left with a mind as empty as a newborn child's. Then he perceived the presence, and in that presence he felt a peace that didn't make logical sense, the peace of knowing that God was there, regardless of what men decided. Then he listened, and in that silence he heard a voice that said, "Do not fear. What men do, I undo. What men destroy, I rebuild. You are my son. No one can take you from me." With that word in his heart, Padre Pio surrendered. He said, "Lord, your will be done. If I am to be condemned, let me be condemned. If I am to be acquitted, let me be acquitted. What truly matters isn't the judgment of others, but God's unwavering love for me." And finally, he gave thanks. He gave thanks even before knowing the outcome. He gave thanks with the certainty that whatever the decision, God would be in control. The following day, the investigation concluded that Padre Pio's stigmata were authentic. Padre Pio was exonerated, but he knew that, even if the result had been different, the peace he found that night would not have changed, because that peace didn't come from the outcome. It came from prayer. The second story involves an Italian woman named Isabella, who came to Padre Pio for confession in 1952. She was desperate. Her husband had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors gave him, at most, 3 months to live. She came begging Padre Pio to perform a miracle. Padre Pio listened to her plea in silence. Then he said something she didn't expect. He said, "I cannot perform miracles. God performs miracles, but I can teach you how to pray in a way that you may have never prayed before. And that prayer can change everything." He taught her the 5 steps: emptiness, presence, listening, surrender, gratitude. He asked her to practice this prayer every night, next to her husband as he slept. He asked her not to keep repeating requests for healing, but to empty herself, perceive God's presence, listen, surrender the situation, and give thanks. Isabella obeyed. Every night, while her husband slept, she sat in the chair beside the bed and practiced the way of Jesus. In the beginning, it was very difficult. Her mind was filled with fear, with anger, with despair. But she persisted. In the second week, something began to shift. She achieved moments of true emptiness, moments when the fear disappeared and only silence remained. And in that silence, she began to perceive the presence, a presence that enveloped her like a warm blanket on a cold night. In the third week, she began to listen, not an audible voice, but impressions in her heart. One night, while praying, she felt an unexplainable certainty that everything would be all right, not a certainty that her husband would be cured, but a certainty that, whatever the outcome, God would take care of them. In the fourth week, she managed to surrender. She said in prayer, "Lord, I want my husband to live, but if you want to take him, I accept. I trust in you more than I trust in my own desires. Do what is best." And then she gave thanks. She gave thanks before knowing the outcome. She gave thanks for the peace she had found. She gave thanks for the certainty that God was present. She gave thanks for the strength to continue. Isabella's husband did not die in 3 months. He lived for another 22 years. The doctors could never explain it. The cancer simply disappeared. Was it a miracle? Isabella believed it was. But she always said, the greatest miracle was not my husband's healing. It was the transformation that happened in me during those nights of prayer. I found a God I didn't know, a God who was so close that I could feel his breath. The third story is about a young American seminarian named David, who came to visit Padre Pio in 1961. He was experiencing a vocational crisis. He didn't know if he should continue in the seminary or abandon everything. He had doubts about faith, about God, about himself. Padre Pio looked at him and said, "You pray a lot, but you listen little. Your prayers are monologues. You speak to God, but you never stop speaking to listen to what God has to say." David was disconcerted. He considered himself a man of prayer. He prayed the breviary every day. He made a holy hour. He participated in daily mass. How could Padre Pio say that he didn't listen? Padre Pio taught him the way of Jesus. He asked him to practice it for 30 days before making any decisions about the seminary. He asked him to stop asking for direction and start listening. David obeyed. In the first few nights, it was a torment. He was so used to talking that the silence bothered him. His mind raced in 1,000 directions, thoughts of doubt, of fear, of anxiety, all competing for attention. But in the second week, something began to shift. The silence became less uncomfortable, the thoughts began to slow down, and in some moments, for a few seconds, he experienced emptiness. An emptiness that was not frightening, but liberating. In the third week, he perceived the presence. And it was like discovering that someone he thought was miles away was actually right next to him the whole time. God was not far away, in the sky, inaccessible. God was there, in the room, so close that David could almost touch him. In the fourth week, he heard, not a voice, but a clarity, a certainty that emerged from the silence like a sunrise. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he should continue in the seminary. Not because someone said so, not because it was expected, but because God himself had communicated this to him in the silence of prayer. David was ordained a priest 3 years later. He served as a missionary in Africa for 40 years. He baptized thousands of people. He founded schools and hospitals, and he always said, it all started with that conversation with Padre Pio. He taught me that I was so busy talking that I couldn't hear what God had to say. The fourth story is about Padre Pio himself. But at a very different moment. It was 1960. He was already 73 years old, and his health was declining. The doctors wanted him to reduce his activities. The superiors of the monastery were worried. But Padre Pio continued waking up at 3 in the morning, continued praying for hours, continued attending to penitence to the point of exhaustion. A fellow friar asked him, "Padre Pio, why don't you rest? You've already done so much. Why don't you allow others to carry the weight?" Padre Pio's response was illuminating. He said, "You think I continue to pray because I am strong. I continue to pray because I am weak. If I stop praying, I will not have the strength for anything. It is in prayer that I find the energy to continue. It is in prayer that I find health for my sick body. It is in prayer that I find peace for my troubled soul. Prayer is not a burden that I carry. It is the strength that carries me." And this perspective is essential to understanding the way of Jesus. It is not a religious obligation. It is not an added burden in an already overburdened life. It is the source of everything. It is the place where you go to be replenished. It is the moment when you stop expending energy and start receiving. There are also some practical details that Padre Pio taught about this prayer. Details that can make the difference between a superficial practice and a transformative practice. First, regarding regularity, Padre Pio said that it is better to pray 10 minutes every day than 1 hour once a week. Consistency matters more than quantity, because every time you practice, you deepen the path. Every time you do the exercise, it becomes easier the next time. But if you skip days, you almost have to start from scratch. Secondly, let's talk posture. Padre Pio preferred to sit in a simple chair, with his spine straight, hands on his knees, and eyes closed. He didn't recommend lying down, because that makes it easier to fall asleep. He didn't recommend kneeling for too long, because the pain in your knees can be distracting. The ideal posture is the one where you can almost forget about your body. Third, the location. If possible, dedicate a specific place to this prayer. It could be a corner of your bedroom, a particular chair, a spot in the house where you won't be interrupted. Padre Pio used to say that the place absorbs the energy of prayer. The more you pray in one spot, the easier it becomes to pray there. Fourth, distractions. They will come. They always do. Even after 50 years, Padre Pio still had distractions. The difference is how you handle them. Don't fight your thoughts. Don't get angry with yourself when your mind wanders. Simply notice that you've drifted and gently return to the silence, without judgment, without frustration. Like a baby who falls when learning to walk, you don't yell at the baby, you help it get back up. Fifth, the results. Don't expect mystical experiences every time. Padre Pio said that 90% of his prayers were dry. No emotions, no visions, no voices, just silence, just faithfulness, just presence. The other 10% made up for everything. But even the 90% that felt dry was doing something. It was deepening the relationship. It was building trust. It was preparing the ground for when God decided to reveal himself more intensely. Now let me tell you about the fruits of this prayer in the life of someone who practices it, because it's no good for me to teach you a method if you don't know what to expect. The first fruit is peace, not a peace that depends on circumstances, but a peace that remains even in the midst of the storm. Padre Pio lived this peace. He was slandered, and he had peace. He was investigated by the church, and he had peace. He was sick, and he had peace, because the peace didn't come from outside. It came from within. It came from the place where he met God every dawn. The second fruit is clarity. People who practice the way of Jesus report an increased ability to discern, to know what to do in complex situations, to perceive God's will in difficult decisions. This doesn't mean the answers come ready-made. It means you develop an inner sensitivity that you didn't have before. The third fruit is strength, not a willpower that you wrest from yourself, but a strength that is given, an ability to face challenges that once seemed impossible. Padre Pio carried burdens that would have crushed any ordinary person, but he didn't carry them alone. Prayer gave him access to a strength that wasn't his own. The fourth fruit is compassion. Whoever encounters God in silence begins to see others with God's eyes, begins to feel what God feels for each person, begins to love in a way that was previously impossible. Padre Pio wept in the confessional, not for his own sorrows, but for the sorrows of the penitents. He had developed the heart of God through prayer. The fifth fruit is eternity. It seems strange, but whoever practices this prayer begins to lose the fear of death, begins to realize that life doesn't end in the tomb, begins to have glimpses of what exists beyond. Padre Pio spoke of death naturally, almost with joy, because for him, dying wasn't losing the presence of God. It was fully encountering the God he already encountered partially every dawn. There's a fifth story I need to tell. A story that illustrates how the way of Jesus can transform not only individuals, but entire families. It's the story of an American family that traveled to Italy to meet Padre Pio. The father's name was Michael. He was a successful businessman, but spiritually empty. He attended church out of a sense of obligation, but he had no real experience of God. His wife, Sarah, was devout, and it was she who insisted on the trip. Their 3 teenage children came along, more interested in seeing Europe than in meeting a stigmatized friar. When they arrived in San Giovanni Rotondo, Michael was skeptical. He thought it was all just religious fanaticism, but he agreed to attend one of the masses celebrated by Padre Pio just to please his wife. During the Mass, something happened. Michael couldn't explain it. Padre Pio raised the consecrated host, and at that moment, Michael felt as if someone had turned on a light inside him. He began to cry, not from sadness, but from an emotion he had never felt, a mixture of joy, longing, and peace. After Mass, he went to speak with Padre Pio. The friar looked at him and said, "You've spent 60 years sleeping. Today you've awakened, but awakening isn't enough. You need to learn how to stay awake." And then Padre Pio taught him the way of Jesus. Michael returned home transformed. He began to wake up early every day to practice the 5 steps. His wife noticed the change immediately. He was more present, more loving, more patient. The children noticed too. The father, who was distant and preoccupied with business, now had time for them. But the most profound transformation happened in the following months. Michael began to teach the way of Jesus to his family. Every night, before going to bed, they gathered in the living room and practiced together. Emptiness, presence, listening, surrender, gratitude. The children, who had been rebellious teenagers, began to change. The eldest daughter, who was always fighting with her mother, found peace. The middle son, who was getting involved with drugs, abandoned his addiction. The youngest, who had problems at school, began to improve his grades. Years later, all 3 children became deeply spiritual people. The eldest daughter entered a convent. The middle son became a doctor and dedicates part of his time to treating the poor for free. The youngest became a teacher and teaches the way of Jesus to his students. Sarah, the wife, told me this story personally when I met her on a pilgrimage. She said, "On that trip, I wanted my husband to find God. I never imagined that God would transform our entire family, all because of a prayer that Padre Pio taught in 15 minutes. This story shows something important. The way of Jesus isn't just for you, it's for everyone around you. When you learn to pray this way, you become a channel of grace for your family, for your friends, for your community. The transformation that happens in you overflows to others." Padre Pio used to say that a single contemplative who prays truly can change the destiny of a nation. because prayer isn't an isolated activity. It's a connection with the source of all power. And when you connect to that source, you become an instrument through which the power of God can flow into the world. There's a warning that Padre Pio always gave about this prayer. He'd say it's not for the curious. It's not for those seeking mystical experiences to brag about. It's not for those who want spiritual power to impress others. It's for those who want to find God and nothing else. If you're searching for experiences, you'll be disappointed, because experiences come when God wills them, not when you demand them. If you're looking for power, you'll be let down, because the power that comes from this prayer isn't for you to wield, it's for God to use through you. But if you're seeking God, genuinely, sincerely, with all your heart, then this prayer is for you, and you will find what you seek. You've just learned the way of Jesus, the 5 steps that Jesus practiced in the quiet hours before dawn, and that Padre Pio revealed to his spiritual children: emptiness, presence, listening, surrender, gratitude. This knowledge has the potential to transform your prayer life. But knowledge alone isn't enough. You need to practice, not tomorrow, not next week, today, tonight, before you go to sleep. Find a quiet space, sit down, close your eyes, and begin. The first few days will be challenging. Your mind will resist. Your thoughts will compete for your attention. You might think you're doing it wrong, but persist. Padre Pio spent years mastering this prayer. You won't achieve it in a week, but every attempt is worth it. Every moment of silence is a seed planted. And remember the words that Jesus spoke to Padre Pio in that vision. True prayer doesn't begin with words. It begins with silence. It's not you talking to God. It's you emptying yourself so that God can speak to you. Bringing this knowledge to you required research, dedication, hours of study of Padre Pio's writings. If this teaching has touched your heart, please consider supporting this work through Super Thanks, the heart-shaped button just below the video. Every contribution helps keep this channel revealing spiritual practices that are often hidden away in ancient books and monastic traditions. In the comments, tell me, what's your prayer life like today? Do you feel that your prayers reach God? Or do you get the impression they just stop at the ceiling? This video was made for you, to show you that there's a deeper way, a way that Jesus taught, a way that Padre Pio practiced, a way that's now in your hands. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe and turn on notifications. I have so much more to share about the spiritual secrets the saints have uncovered, knowledge that can transform your relationship with God. May Padre Pio intercede for you. May he teach you to pray as Jesus prayed. May the silence that he so loved fill your soul, and may you find in the quiet hours of your life the same God that he found every morning in San Giovanni Rotondo. Amen.